Hello, and welcome to this week's Liberation Day edition of the Scrimshaw Show. My name is Evan Scrimshaw. Um, Donald Trump has decided to nuke the global economy, except not Canada, except still definitely kind of Canada. Um, my understanding of economics only goes so far. One of the few people on this planet I actually like happens to be a trade lawyer, so decided to tap in a buddy, Robert Glasgow, partner at McCarthy's, good friend of the podcast and the site, trade lawyer extraordinaire, fellow Ottawa Senators fan. Any other particularly important insights, Robert?
Just the insight that I am a lawyer, but if you're listening, I am not your lawyer, and nothing I say here can be construed as legal advice.
Mostly because you haven't paid for legal advice.
I mean, that's true, yes.
Thanks for doing this, buddy.
Always happy to come on.
You
want to for a while. I think I can help
on the podcast, but that's fine.
Well, I'm really happy to be here to talk about, trade and trade policy and the intersection with our election, of course. It's a really interesting area. Of course, not that, happy that this is all happening and that we're having this kind of trade apocalypse in the broader global trading scheme. But, hopefully I can help give some insight, and this can be informative and hopefully fairly entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to lie to people. I'm going to be getting drunk as this conversation goes because I can't do 60 to 90 minutes of this bullshit sober. So Donald Trump has just decided to nuke the global economy for no real reason, based on a calculation that is really seems like it was like Chat GPT'd, of how to calculate quote unquote reciprocal tariffs that aren't in any way, shape, or form actually reciprocal. He's stacking tariffs on tariffs in some cases, but not in other cases. In some cases, it's tariffs on tariffs, like with China, it's tariffs on tariffs, but in other places, it's not. Canada is still facing the steel, aluminum, and autos tariffs. There's potential for tariffs on lumber coming, but to be clear, nobody has really any idea what Donald Trump's going to do at any point ever in time. I guess the first question just has to be, it is precisely as stupid as it seems to people who don't do this for a living what Donald Trump is doing, right? Like, there's not secretly some like great strategy that we're all the plebs are just too stupid to beat, right? Like, this is precisely as stupid as it seems, right?
Oh no, this is incredibly stupid. So just to zoom back, yeah, this is exactly as stupid as it seems. And we have to understand is that Donald Trump here, he seems irrational, but if you are an irrational person that has his mindset, it actually makes rational sense. I know that sounds crazy because it kind of is, but you have to understand Donald Trump going back like the 1980s is a mercantilist. He hated NAFTA. He railed against it. He almost ran as a Reform Party candidate in the U.S. because he hated NAFTA so much. He fundamentally does not understand the concept of trade. He views everything as a zero-sum game. And so from his perspective, if you are having exports, you're winning. And if you're having imports, you're losing. And he doesn't like losing. And so that's why when there's a trade imbalance, when he has more, his country has more imports than exports, he views that as a loss. And so that's what grounds his kind of, quote unquote, I don't even want to call it economic theory because it's just so crazy. His calculation here, which is essentially the trade deficit. So imports minus exports, exports minus imports, and divide that by the total exports of that country. And that ends up giving you the percentage that they said was the kind of implied tariff, because the U.S. government has actually officially confirmed in the New York Post that the concept of the trade deficit is the, as they put it, sum of all the trade practices, the sum of all the cheating of the other countries. And that's just crazy, because that's not what trade deficit is. Trade deficits are simply a reflection of, again, the imports versus the exports. But what you don't understand is that having more imports than exports isn't a sign that you're being cheated. It's a sign that you're really rich and that your country is prosperous and you're able to buy lots of goods and have a very strong consumer economy. And usually,
why is it? Yeah, why the sort of like obvious example, and we're gonna keep this sort of broad, right? We don't need to pick on any individual company or whatever, but like, why is it good for America that they have to make t-shirts or sneakers or whatever for minimum wage? Why is that a component part of the economy? Because the thing is, if you wanted to quote unquote fix your trade imbalance, make $3 t-shirts, or make those in an assembly line. Sure, great. You take that back from Bangladesh or Vietnam or wherever, right? Why is that an industry that Americans really need to get back? Why is it a bad thing that they don't have that industry?
It's not. So from Trump's perspective, I've sometimes joked that it's juche all the way down. And for those of you who don't know, juche is the North Korean concept of kind of self-reliance, or if you're going to use kind of official Western term, autarky, that your nation should be self-sufficient and that you should be able to make everything your people want. And as you indicated, that means that you're going to be having factories making $3 t-shirts. And that's why you get a lot of rhetoric from Trump supporters about the hollowing out of the economy or the destruction of the manufacturing base of the U.S. And that's just poppycock at the end of the day. The U.S. manufacturing output is actually second in the world. It's behind China, admittedly, but the gap between the U.S. manufacturing output and third place, which is just Germany, is about threefold. So it takes 3 Germanys to equal 1 United States. That's how big the gap between them and the third place manufacturer is. So there's lots of manufacturing happening in the US. Just instead of making $3 t-shirts, they're making like $1.5 billion fighter jets. And the profit margin on fighter jets, on complex machinery, on stuff that requires precision machine tooling to make is really, really high. And the profit margin on underwear is really, really low. And for some reason, this White House is determined to displace investment in really high profit margin, high quality manufacturing with underwear. And it makes no sense. It's what we call the value chain. You always want to be moving up the value chain as an economy. But Donald Trump has caused huge economic damage to his own country to go down the value chain.
At a severe cost to the American taxpayers, or consumers, I should say. Okay. I want to focus on this as an economic strategy at first, because it's obviously like deeply funny to be like, this is the man who won because gas prices and shit were too high under Joe Biden, and his response is a national sales tax, essentially. Is there any rhyme or reason? I mean, there isn't, but like, because we know how these numbers were gotten to, but like, they've just basically kind of made numbers up. Right, Vietnam's 46, China's 34, but it's really 54 because it's tariffs on tariffs. Like, they just made this up, right? It's just entirely like fake numbers. It's like, how quickly do you think before this like completely unravels, to the extent that like American retailers are just literally not going to have supplies next week because it's completely uneconomical now to import?
So, number one, I think it's already being felt. Like, we see like the futures markets, where the markets in the morning are already just collapsing. So, I mean, the stock market's already reflecting how much damage this is going to do. As I said, the numbers aren't quite made up. They're based upon this super simplistic trade balance calculation that essentially someone on Twitter put it. They asked ChatGPT for the simplest, dumbest way to create a reciprocal tariff, and this is what ChatGPT created. It like recreated this process. It's going to cause huge problems in the supply chain. It's going to cause huge problems, as you said, for retailers. We're probably going to see more and more of them just being out of stock. The one kind of irony of this is that they preserved the de minimis exemption, and in the U.S., it's if you have any shipment coming to you from overseas that's under $800. It comes in tax and duty free. In Canada, I believe the number is like $40. Initially, when Trump put his duties on Canada, Mexico, and China in February and then in March, he exempted duty free. He didn't exempt duty free, de minimis shipments. So all of those are being captured. But then on the first weekend, I think it was Newark's cargo terminal started overflowing with packages because customs had no way of actually inspecting the sheer volume. So they've actually had to just waive the duties on de minimis shipments. So the people that can best survive this from a supply chain are overseas producers in China, Southeast Asia, and Bangladesh, who are doing direct-to-consumer sales under the de minimis level. So you're actually boxing out all the big retailers that have quality goods, that are trying to get goods into the United States. And you're really opening the door for these small, cheap, quick fashion goods to come in without being tariffed. It's actually pretty crazily backwards compared to what you would think the goal would be.
So basically, Temu is the big winner out of this.
I mean, not to talk about any one particular entity, but again, any entity that's doing de minimis shipments is going to be coming around this, and entities are bringing in large container loads for their own stores are the ones that are going to end up paying the price in the U.S. I mean, we've already seen Volpe, the head of the Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, has already come out and pointed out that if the auto tariffs extend to auto parts, and we can talk about the auto tariffs if you want, because it's actually pretty interesting, it's going to shut down the auto trade in North America within a week. Like it's going to go to COVID levels of tools down.
So that's I think the auto tariffs are sort of fascinating. It's like there's no putting the genie back in the bottle on autos. There just isn't, right? And everybody who claims that there is, fuck you, Sean Fain, right? Yep. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle. There's no undoing this. There's no unfucking the dog, whatever metaphor you want to use here, right? There's no undoing this. The auto packs of the 60s were made for a reason, even at a time when broader free trade was not really on the agenda, right? The auto packs were a very specific point because the pre-auto packs, it made no sense. It was dumb as shit, right? It was obvious to everybody with a brain that it made zero sense to be duplicative of, to have, plants in Windsor and Detroit working against each other, or plants in Oshawa and Detroit working against each other, or Toledo, or wherever the fuck, right? It made no fucking sense. And so, and the sort of reliability of it, and then the institution of the US Canada FTA in the 80s and the NAFTA in the 90s, they've integrated to such an extent. Things go back and forth because they have sort of it's drill sergeant precision that gets to this stuff, right? They have figured out, they have ironed out all the wrinkles, all the details. This shit is a conveyor, like, both literally but also metaphorically, a conveyor belt. And there's no one ringing that bell. And is anybody going to notice? Is anybody in the U.S. administration going to figure that out before before GM stock is, or sorry, any of the car maker stocks are, half of what they are now?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I was reading a publication earlier that was talking about, the auto trade and where auto parts come in. And it was interesting because they were saying, like, here's some different models and different manufacturers tracking what percentage of which component comes from Mexico, comes from overseas. And then the last element comes from US plus Canada. And they had a special note saying the supply chain of US and Canada is so integrated, it is impossible to pull out the relative value of a part between Canada and the United States. Again, Flavio Volpe had posted a picture I've used in conversations with people about, I believe it's a suspension of a light truck. And it's pointing out each of the different screws and arms and pads and showing where they come from on that one model. And they come from all three countries in the USMCA bloc. And it's like, as you put it, try to tell me what the value of this is US content, because I can't. It's just so impossible to do. It's just so self-defeating. I mean, that might be, so right now, for those of you listening, the current tariff, just so we can understand what it is on autos, it's a 25% tariff on autos, foreign-made autos imported into the US. But there is an exemption for USMCA compliant, which means automobiles that meet the USMCA rules of origin, for the US value content. So you separate out how much the parts and labor that happened in the US, and that's the value assigned to the vehicle as US content. And everything else you pay the 25% on, but you don't have to for that component. For auto parts, there's a delay until, I believe, May 3rd for all auto parts, but USMCA auto parts have this additional delay where the secretary has been given 3 months and 90 days to come up with a way of calculating the US value content of parts, to do a similar kind of calculations for autos, to be able to pull out the US content and only tariff the non-US content. My hope on this is that because it doesn't have a strict deadline, just as 90 days, that's the sort of thing that you can kind of roll. There's nothing that, opponents or people wanting to make fun of Trump can latch onto and say, you said by May 3rd or whatever, it would come into place. You just have this kind of rolling 90-day period to come up with this mechanism. And hopefully he can keep playing that out and maybe extending, just like, the secretary has technically had time to come up with a de minimis calculation mechanism. Maybe they're just going to play that out for auto parts. And that's probably the best case scenario, because when you're building a car, I think the average auto part crosses a border between Canada, the US, and Mexico something like 12 times before the car is completed.
Yeah, it feels like this is just, I mean, not that anything Donald Trump has ever done has been well thought out, but like this feels even more stupidly and not thought out than normal.
It's one of the dividing lines I have, and I know you'll tell me this because we've talked about these things before, that this is a very Trump 1.0 thought. But I like to differentiate between the stuff I dislike, but is stuff that like a typical Republican might do, and stuff I dislike that's just extra special kind of Donald Trump thought. And
I would give so goddamn much for Mitt Romney to be president right now.
So much. But like my baseline here is like we've had very harsh steel tariffs before in the United States. And those were imposed by George W. Bush. So steel is something that presidents, including supposed free trader Republican presidents who are very committed to kind of a neoliberal, international economics policy, will embrace steel tariffs. So I'm not saying that they're good, they're bad, they're very bad. Those tariffs cost a lot of jobs. Trump's 1.0 steel tariffs cost a lot of jobs in the US as well as abroad. And these tariffs are going to cost a lot of jobs. They're bad, but they're the sort of bad that other presidents have done. Something like these auto tariffs are just la la land craziness that no rational president would even think about doing.
Let's talk about the politics of this. We'll get back to the like absolute nonsensicalness of this. Obviously, to whatever extent that this was, Carney himself, we don't know. But whether it was Carney, whether it was just good politics in a general sense, whether it was congressional pressure, Mitch McConnell, Canada gets the exemption from the getting basically the full bat thrown at us, or swung at us, I guess, to use the proper baseball analogy. People are claiming that, well, Mexico got an exemption too, so this was never like, it wasn't McCarthy. Also, the sort of like, well, this is just proof that, the annexation stuff was never real and the liberals have just lied to us. Is there a like good faith explanation for this, or are people just like are conservatives just straight up like losing their shit because they realize that today was a very good day for McCarthy?
I think it's just pure cope, just pure copium all the way through.
I agree with that.
I don't. So on the Mexico front and all this, like, it's impossible to say how much of any individual contact or communication or lobbying effort had an impact, how much internally had an impact. I noted that Trump apparently said that he talked to Lee Iacocca about his tariff plan, and Lee Iacocca's been dead since 2019. So who knows, maybe Lee had a good word to Trump at some point, possibly during a dream, maybe got, a Marley's ghost kind of situation there. But honestly, I think there's a combination of factors here. Number one, I think Carney came in, he took a very strong position. And if there is one thing that strongmen leaders like Trump or like Vladimir Putin respect, it's strength and aggression. And I think Carney coming in with a stern but powerful tone, the speech he gave about our relationship being kind of forever altered, I think that was something of a shock. I also think, and full credit, and you know how much this is going to hurt me, full credit to Doug Ford. I think the way he and Carney initially play kind of, bon cop, bad cop initially, and then essentially flipped roles after Ford pulled back on the electricity tariffs and they had their meeting with Kudlow. And up until that point, he'd been the tough and Carney had been kind of trying to talk to Kudlow and others and been a little bit more conciliatory. And then afterwards, when Ford started to be the more conciliatory figure and Carney took a sterner stance, I think that's all very effective. I think the fact that Mexico got a deal as well kind of speaks to the fact that Mexico has its own set of leverage. But I think it is significant that Carney had some very strong and powerful language. And immediately afterwards, we saw a change in tune from the U.S. president, and we saw he dropped the entire governor shtick. He dropped a lot of the annexation talk, and I think, quite frankly, it's a personality fit that I think benefits Canada.
We'll get back to that in a minute, the personality stuff, because you've raised that to me before. I think the people. Okay, this is my like hottest take, but I straight up don't give enough of a shit anymore to protect feelings. The people who act like Scheinbaum is like playing a tactical masterclass. She has like 1,000 times more leverage than we do, because there is actually a fentanyl problem at the southern border, and there's like actually like a cartels problem at the southern border, and like there's like actually a lot of things that an American president would want to achieve on the southern border, and therefore you have a lot more things that you could acquiesce to get what you want, right? We don't really have any of that because we tried this, right? We tried the we give them like a fentanyl czar or whatever nonsense. none of that mattered because there was never any fentanyl coming in the first place. I think the reason that I think it's copium, and I've talked to a bunch of people tonight because, like, I legitimately was crashing out when people were trying to say this was somehow bad for Mark Carney. Like, I fully was losing my mind. The problem I keep coming back to about this is if the ballot question at this election is going to be, how do you handle the, like, to quote Stephen Harper, the sea of uncertainty around us, right? You know, his whole shtick in 2011 was we're the island of stability in a sea of chaos, right?
Yeah.
If the question, if the ballot box question is something similar to 2011, who do you trust? Right? Who do you trust in a moment of crisis? Isn't central banker who's already gotten Trump to cut us at exemption once a pretty damn good argument? And if the question is sort of like competence and whatever, if Mark Carney just stared down Donald Trump, it feels like that's probably good for people's perception of his ability to handle the housing crisis or whatever else. Obviously, there was that, I believe it was Palace polling this week that said 12-point lead for the Liberals on handling the housing crisis. So it's not even clear to me that people are blaming Carney for Trudeau-era failures. But, like, man, the idea, the notion, the very fucking notion that Mark Carney is going to face political problems because Donald Trump didn't tariff him. What are we talking about? Is Donald Trump suddenly going to shut the fuck up? Is Donald Trump going to spend the next 4 weeks sitting sitting at Mar-a-Lago playing golf with fucking Bryson DeChambeau and, like, true socialing, like, live Masters takes? Is he going to be giving out, like, live T5s like he's Pat fucking Mayo? Of course not. He's going to be doing batshit things and saying batshit things and probably fucking threatening us again at some point. The idea that Trump is just going to go away now and we can go back to having the election we quote unquote should be having, right? The election about drug policy or, or health policy or, immigration policy that we would have had if Jagmeet had brought the government down in September of 2024, right? The idea that we're suddenly going back to that, to quote Kamala Harris, we're not going back.
So no, this is insane on so many different levels, and, like, the first level that this is insane on is, and, quite frankly, it's kind of insulting. And, tell me you're an Albertan without telling me you're an Albertan is when you say that, oh, Trump's not tariffing us. Like, tell that to a Hamilton steel worker or a Quebec aluminum worker or a Windsor auto worker or an Oshawa auto worker. Like, we still have, even if you discard the 25% tariff on non-USMCA compliant exports to the US, which, I mean, we can talk if we get back into the number weedsiness. The number they talked about was 38% of our goods are USMCA compliant. It's actually a lot higher. It's just because it's inconvenient to deal with USMCA compliance. But, we still have substantial exports that might not be USMCA compliant that are transshipped or drop shipped from trade partners. We still have steel. We still have aluminum products. We still have autos and the specter of auto parts. Like, there are still significant tariffs that have been placed on us from before Mark Carney's time or just as he is taking office, that he's going to have to fight through and are still a very important part of this election. And there's always the specter that, these reciprocal tariffs were currently exempt, but the specter of them hangs over our head like a sword of Damocles if you don't have a deft hand at the tiller. And so it speaks to having someone who's shown a history of being able to solve this problem, that's a good skill set to have. And maybe that's the person you want instead of, Poilievre's kind of concession to Trump in his, quote unquote, idea of, voluntary disarmament that he floated earlier in the day. So that's the first kind of area of craziness, this thing that we don't have these issues. And the second area of craziness to me is the thought that somehow this is unimportant that he's been able to do this. I think it shows such a level of gravitas, of understanding, and of acumen that he's able to pull off this kind of feat. And I say it's a feat because, like, leading up to this, Emily, because of my job, I've actually had to be obsessively reading Twitter, be reading leaks, be reading Lutwak and Kudlow's kind of pieces, and piecemeal distribution. I mean, we even have a group of students helping us kind of pull some of this information together to help us digest it, to make sure we don't miss anything. It's important to helping our clients and helping the public understand the situation. And so you hear things like, for example, the VAT. That was one thing that got leaked out, is that they considered our GST and for some places our HST as being a VAT, potentially a source of this kind of reciprocal tariff threat. You had the supply management system, which they took as part of the tariff threat. It was leaked out the French language law as a technical barrier to trade. And there's numerous other areas that they've been leaking out have been issues they're raising with our economy and things that they might hit us with this reciprocal stick with. So this isn't just like an idle threat that was never going to happen. This is something that was a very real threat and required a very real response. And it's a response that Mark Carney took time off of the campaign to go and do. It's a response that was prime ministerial. And I think that is something that is going to stick in people's heads. And I say, we all have our sounding boards, and I have a particularly important sounding board of someone that's super intelligent, highly qualified, but much more of a normie than me. They aren't particularly like every day consume all of the politics all the time on Twitter because they have balance and a sense of themselves. And I asked them, about these takes, and the only thing they could do is roll their eyes. Because it's just such an absurd proposition to someone who is normal that Mark Carney pulling this off is somehow not important.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I understand how you have to contort yourself to get to this position. I read about a different kind of contortion in my Wednesday afternoon column about the sort of like, well, if you take the Quebec tab from Angus Reid and the Abacus Ontario number and the this BC number, and you mix them all together, you get something that kind of looks like a close race, right? Sort of contortions of political partisans, right? You're seeing it a lot, right? The sort of, oh, but if you trust the Leger GTA tab, right, and ignore the fact that somehow Northern, Southern, and Hamilton Niagara is somehow a redder region, sort of collection of regions, I should say, than the 416 and the 905. Yeah, cool. So if you only believe that one crosstab and ignore the fact that the Liberals would probably defeat Michael Chong and definitely defeat Pierre Poilievre if that poll was correct, we're going to ignore that, but we're going to trust that they're going to win this GTA seats. The level of intellectual hacker you have to be a partisan in politics these days is fairly high. If anybody wants to call me a partisan hack, I sort of joke about it in the column that'll be up by the time people are reading this, of like, I don't know what you expected from me, man. I've never pretended to be neutral. I've never pretended to be anything other than a liberal, than a left-wing hack, right? If you had different expectations for me, that is something that I would take up with you, not with me. But the contortions here don't seem to make sense. It doesn't make logical sense that somehow people are concerned about the threat of tariffs. Mark Carney handles tariffs. Somehow that's bad. That doesn't follow logically. And then the last thing I want to sort of iterate on, right? Donald Trump is not going away. I know I just made this point. I want to make it again. He's not going away. You know what the number one story? I will bet a not insignificant, I will put my reputation on the line here, right? You know what the top story on Power and Politics tomorrow is going to be? Donald Trump tariffs.
Yep.
You know why? even though we got bailed out of this by Carney, right? Because it still is going to fuck our economy. Now, there are opportunities if we think this sticks. There are opportunities, which I want to get to in a bit. How much do we think that part of the reason that Carney had more success at this than Trudeau, who, in fairness, Trudeau did very well with the limited cards that he had, and the limited cards had mostly nothing to do with Donald Trump. Just he was a lame duck PM who was polling at like 20%. So like, there's just not a lot you can do in that situation, and he played the limited cards he had very well. How much do you think it is sort of like Carney's a banker, right? He's an ex-Goldman guy. Donald Trump has been meeting with Mark Carneyites his entire life, right? How much do you think is just the fact that Carney is the kind of person who like knows Trump, has dealt with Trumpian figures quite a lot in his life, and like just knows what buttons to press, how to play them? Like, do we think that is like a meaningful part of it?
So I mean, I definitely do, and I mean, you know my thoughts on this. I mean, we get so obsessed with Mark Carney as, you know, Oxford PhD, and Mark Carney is Bank of Canada and then Bank of England governor, and his role in the Department of Finance, that we often forget, you know, the Mark Carney that was a Goldman investment banker, and we forget the Mark Carney that was, you know, technically D1 hockey player. Technically the Ivies are D1, so I'm gonna sneak that in there. It's a personality type that I think actually works reasonably well with Donald Trump, because, you know, Donald Trump was also an Ivy Leaguer. He also was someone who, at least in high school, he's a baseball player. So he is very much into athletics as a concept. I mean, he's been a sports fan for most of his life. He tried to buy an NFL team. He tried to leverage the USFL to get him enough leverage to get an NFL team. He's been working with bankers his whole life, and investment banking in the 90s was a very particular niche, and you had to be able to, you know, live and exist in that niche. I think it's a case of Mark Carney is someone who fundamentally Trump understands, and I don't know if like is the right word, but like he's comfortable with. I think it's something in stark contrast. I mean, you know, we're talking about the elections, in stark contrast with someone like Pierre Poilievre, who's, you know, a guy that's been, you know, a public servant his whole life, and when I say public servant, actually I should take that back, because, you know, my parents are public servants. They were diplomats. They were civil servants. He's been a politician his whole life. He hasn't had a private sector job. He
got his pension at 31, baby.
Yeah, he's a guy that, you know, admittedly, he's gone into better shape since he started practicing. You know, he's gone from politician to politician that looks like he might CrossFit at least sometimes. But he's not someone that's an athlete. He's not someone that, you know, again, from my limited observation of him, that would be comfortable talking about football or hockey or baseball. Pick whatever sport you want. And that's why I think, you know, Carney still wins on things like who you'd rather have a beer with. Like Carney is, you know, awkward on the ice as an old man looked like he was, you know, getting along reasonably well at that Edmonton Oilers morning skate, and very clearly was enjoying himself. And that's something that I'm not sure someone like Pierre Poilievre could pull off. And I think that's something that plays with Donald Trump. I think that Trump is a guy who wants someone that, you know, would talk about sports, someone that understands the business world. I think that that's an asset. Like, I think at the end of the day, the rest of the relationship with the U.S. is going to be a holding action. If you want to, we can talk about, you know, long-term prospects of the Canada-U.S. relationship and the damage this has done, which I think is extensive. But, you know, right now you're just in crisis management. You've got to, you know, save the furniture. You've got to hold on to what you can get. Got to try to keep things stable and try to survive through the Trump years and the chaos, because you fundamentally can't trust whatever agreement you're going to get with him at the end of the day to be permanent. So you need someone who's constantly watching, constantly on edge, and has experience keeping a careful watch on complex financial and trade relationships. And fundamentally, if I'm going to have someone doing that, do I want a lifetime, backbench or minor minister MP, or do I want someone that was a Bank of Canada, Bank of England governor, and an investment banker? And I think my money's probably on the latter.
Yeah, I think Carney is the right person for the moment, which is really funny because I was never a Carney guy, right? Like I used to argue about this with Nathaniel Larfin, right, on this podcast sometimes, and I was never a big Carney guy. One of the just truly funniest moments in recent Scrimshaw history. This would have been the Saturday after Trudeau resigned. Do you know where I'm going with this story?
Oh, I can't quite. I remember some of this pod and him talking about.
No. That's not where I'm going. I'm not really getting the ARPA stuff. No. The Saturday after Trudeau resigned, I ran the column I wrote in October about Carney's record's not quite as great as people think it is.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah. The next day, Steve McKinnon decides he's not running for fucking leader. And I'm like, well, fuck me, I guess.
Well, see, look, they jammed you up, but the good news is you had one of those Yankees torpedo bats, so you could turn that jam up into a home run, and it's been coasting pretty well.
The fact, oh my God, when I got the text message that Steve was having a crisis of confidence, oh my God, that nearly took me out. I was so scared. Thank God I did the pivot properly, but man, I wouldn't have run that call if I would have known I'd been endorsing Carney a week later. Although, thank you, Tom Allison. Thank you, Tom Allison, for running Christier's campaign. That made my choice quite easy.
I mean, for me, it's a lot more natural fit. I mean, I'm a Bay Street lawyer. I come from my mother was a former ambassador. Been steeped in this kind of free trade. I fit, and I know, as a friend of the pod, frequent guest David Coletto has his chart of various positions, and I fall into that small, socially liberal kind of free market. I hate using economically conservative because I don't consider it conservative, but free market square that's relatively small. And that's where people typically drop people like Mark Carney. I know Nate would say, well, read his book, and there's differences there. But I'm more of a natural fit, but I also wasn't necessarily a big Carney guy initially. But I have to say, his handling of this tariff issue has been really, really good for me. I think he's done an excellent job in getting through that. There's definitely some bumps on the road. There's been some issues I've disagreed with the handling, but you can't win every battle with any candidate. If you have a candidate that's absolutely perfect, chances are you just haven't hit the battle you can't win yet.
Yeah, that's sort of where I am with Carney, and I mean, frankly, Carney is mostly past the thresholds I needed him to. Kept Nate Erskine-Smith in cabinet at the housing portfolio. His housing plan is quite remarkably good. I've been impressed. I've been very impressed by Carney. The funny thing is that people, call me. I got called a liberal cultist on Twitter today. Yeah,
that must contrast.
That's definitely an accurate reflection of my views of the Liberal Party in the last 12 months, for sure.
I was about to say that must contrast with all the times you were called a Russian agent for saying that Trudeau must resign.
Russian and Indian agent. That was really fun. When people would just continuously accuse me of taking foreign money. Yeah, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter about that at all. I'm not bitter about the fact that some of the people who were trafficking in that bullshit happen to work on Parliament Hill and be, MP and ministerial staffers. Yeah, no, not bitter about that in the fucking slightest. Speaking of things that I have been completely vindicated about, would you like to take a brief spin at explaining why the NDP's attacks on corporate grocery stores and kind of sort of hinting at price controls isn't going to work?
God. So I'm well aware that I'm an old man. And even for me, this is when I was young. People have to remember one of the things that caused the complete disintegration of the communist system in the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation was when Boris Yeltsin came over and he toured a budget grocery store in Texas and initially couldn't believe it. Like he thought that it was like a Potemkin village, that it was like set up purely for image's purpose. I think they ended up taking like another one or something just to prove that it wasn't, but just astounded at the variety and availability of a wide range of cheap and desirous, quote unquote, kind of luxury food items that were just available at a budget grocery store in Texas. And this is in the 90s. And since then, we've just had more and more and more. Like, say what you want about grocery stores and how they operate and who runs them. At the end of the day, we have a huge variety of food. And if you set up, government stores, you kind of get a choice. Well, are we going to run government stores at a loss? And are we just going to have taxpayers pay for that? And then if the answer is yes, it's like, well, then why don't we just have better funding for food bank systems and try to set up better social supports and direct monetary transfers to needy people so that, they can make their own decisions on what they want to eat instead of having the government make a decision on what they're going to get to eat. Or are we going to do it with, as you said, price controls and say, well, we're just going to have, anti-corporate stores will just have strict price controls, but then you're just going to have shortages. You're going to have no selection on what's available. You're going to have a tight selection, not that much quantity of anything that is available. And you're just going to have empty shelves. Like this concept of a government-run store it makes no economic sense. It flies in the face of decades of lived practical experience as well as kind of economic theory.
Yeah, I mean, The really funny thing is there was some groceries are too expensive in the north, we'll cap prices tweet from the NDP, and I checked the replies in the quote tweets and it was just northerner after northerner after northerner being like, oh great, so we're not gonna eat. Cool. Yeah. Because respectfully, that's just what's gonna happen. There isn't a solution that's gonna make bacon cost the same in Iqaluit as it does in Ottawa, right?
No, it's a supply chain that can't be fixed. And I mean, I'm totally sympathetic to the position that there are people, and a growing number of people, and as groceries get more expensive, that need assistance, and that we should be trying to come up with well-designed welfare state programs to help take care of those people. But the key here is well-designed, and not government store that's going to run out of food and have shit availability.
Yeah. Have you heard anything else that the NDP has proposed in this entire campaign?
I've heard
because I have not.
The tax changes. Because and this admittedly is one of the problems.
This is literally news to me.
So each of the parties, in my mind, is being fantastically financially illiterate and irresponsible in their changes. In terms of total magnitude, I believe the Liberals are actually being the least irresponsible. So, I mean, points for being the least bad, yay. With cutting the bottom tax bracket by 1%. The Conservatives will cut that bottom tax bracket by 2.5%. which they cleverly name a 15% cut, even though
I was told it was a 15% tax cut, though. What do you mean it's only 2.25%?
Well, because if you reduce that tax rate by 2.25, then that's technically 15% less than the old rate, and it's
My favorite thing is, of course, this is the same trick that got Jim Prentice in trouble in 2015 by claiming Rachel Notley's 2-point increase on the corporate tax rate was a 20% increase.
Yeah, it's just craziness to call that. But again, 2.5%, which, as you might know, is 2.5 times bigger than 1%, which is 2.5 times as fiscally responsible. And I mean, quite frankly, again, when you're cutting that lowest tax bracket, number one, you're doing nothing for people who are making below the tax bracket amount, who are in that basic personal amount, who are the people in the most extreme poverty and most extreme need. You are helping out people in that lowest tax bracket, but you're helping them just a little bit because, you know, they don't pay a whole lot of taxes. You know who you're helping out a lot? You're helping out me. Like, I get to claim that entire bracket worth of income at 1% lower. In fact, that 1% flows all the way through the system as things stack. And I end up doing much better than anyone who's in that lowest tax bracket from this change. And I do 2.5 times better under the conservatives than I do under the liberals. So, I mean, if we're talking purely about pocketbook stuff, like leaving out the fact that as a conservative party, I know I'm going to get boutique tax credits for like kids sports and ballet lessons and that sort of thing, which, you know, my kids are getting to an age where they're doing that. So yay me. I'm much better off fiscally with a conservative party government. It's disastrously bad for a lot of people who need help. And so I'm against it. The NDP change, it's a bit interesting because what they've done is they're planning to extend that basic personal amount and bring it up. So it's not necessarily helping the poorest of the poor who are already in that lowest bracket, but it's extending.
Oh, they're lib-debbing this shit? Oh, fuck them.
Yeah. So they're upping that. But then the other thing they're doing, and so for people who don't know, that basic personal amount you get on your income taxes, when you start to get to high income levels, that drops off. Like it drops off by about, I think, $1,000 right now. And the the NDP's policy, I believe, moves up the beginning of the drop off to the second highest tax bracket, which I think kicks in at $140,000 a year. And then it more aggressively drops off to the point at which I think at the top bracket, it disappears entirely. So it's actually, you know, a little bit better in the sense of their change at least isn't making people like me better off. Like I don't see any benefit from that change, which, you know, probably good, but it also, number one, doesn't help, you know, the people already at the bottom. It just moves people who are next to that into that group that gets that help. And number two, just like the CPC plan, it's expensive. And, you know, it's nice to have a steak on every plate, but you can't in our system. Like we have a limited amount of money and fiscal capacity. And especially when we're heading into tariff fights, as you pointed out, even if we've been exempted from these tariffs, this is going to have a big impact on our economy. So helping our economy, keeping our economy afloat, paying for accelerated defense spending, like doing all of these other things is going to take money. And to be taking money and just throwing it at tax cuts instead of using it to achieve the aims we need and to preserve our integrity, I think is kind of irresponsible. So again, this is an area where I have a problem with all of them. That's, you know, including the New Democrat policy. I think all of them have serious problems on this. And I just think the Liberals might have the least worst plan, but that's, you know, damning with faint praise.
Yeah, I mean, the question I sort of keep coming back to with this election, and I mean, where is Pierre Poilievre getting the money? Like, legitimately, where the fuck is he getting the money? Because he is offering TFSA boosts and, corporate tax finaglements or capital gains, sorry, not corporate tax, capital gains bullshit for reinvestment and a bigger private thing and a bunch of retiree crap. It's like, dude, where are you getting the fucking money? Like, Carney can spend whatever the fuck he wants. You can't beat him on fiscal discipline with all of the giveaways that you're offering. And you can't even be like, well, the proceeds of growth are going to pay for it. What fucking growth? What growth are we expecting in the next 2 years? Because the thing is, right, even if Canada's exempted, the Europeans are going to get hit, which means we're probably going to have a European recession or something close to it, right? Americans are definitely going into recession. Again, assuming that these tariffs last for like a sub 10 day or for more than 10 days, right? Like the US is going into recession. The US probably will go into recession just from the uncertainty alone, let alone anything else. And frankly, do we really have the political connect? Like, do we really have the political relationships and political sort of buy-in from the country to really go all in on more trade with China right now, or more trade with India? Like, I don't know that we can really tap those wells right now, given gestures at foreign interference.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know those are markets we can open up to heavily. I'm always one to say that sometimes you got to make compromises because, sometimes the situation needs the lesser of two evils. But I'm not, I'm not there yet on some of those compromises. I think Poilievre, as you said, is done Carney a favor in that by promising the sun, the moon, and the stars. He's taken off, the attack of I'll balance the budget, because there's no way he can say that with a straight face. He's not even doing the fun Carney trick of setting up
spending.
the OPEX CapEx budgets, which I don't know. Do you know what I believe is the origin of that?
No.
So I'm going to do my history nerd thing, because as all dads of a certain age, you become history nerds. I think at least some of the origin of that is Ancien Régime France and Louis XVI, when after the American Revolution, they were scrambling because their finances were completely in the shitter and they owed so much money to so many people. And they had to publish their books in the Compte Rendu for reasons. They came up with a plan on how to divide the budget, which is, they said, we're going to have the ordinary budget and then the special budget, which only captures like one-time costs. Because there's no point putting the one-time costs in the ordinary budget, because they only happen once. It's not like a recurring cost. And then they published the ordinary budget and just kept the special one-time budget, off the books, because they said, well, that doesn't really count. It's just a one-time budget. It's just a one-time cost. We don't have to worry about it. And that ended up causing just massive scandal down the line, because when people saw the Compte Rendu and they saw the way that the special budget gets pulled in and what it does to the numbers, they assumed the regime was lying about being in financial difficulty, because they said, no, we saw in the original Compte Rendu that you were totally fine, and now you say you have this massive budget deficit because of this special budget. What are you talking about? To be fair to the Liberals here, from my understanding of the plan, that there is actually going to be like a generally accepted accounting practices methodology of doing capital depreciation. So it's not like it's a one-time expense, so we put it in the CapEx budget and then ignore it. And I would hope that Carney, again, has the financial wherewithal to be able to say, look, we're going to set up a way of allocating revenues to the CapEx budget and the OPEX budget on like a rational accounting basis that makes sense.
Well, so my theory is that the sort of the reason that he has made this distinction so clearly is so that he can do the public builder on housing.
Yeah.
And maybe move some defense procurement over there at the same time. But like, if the public builder is going to achieve what it's supposed to, I mean, again, we're owning the home, so it's not that big of a deal from a debt management standpoint, right? But like, no one will treat that like on sort of as hugely concerning debt, because again, we're buying or we're building an asset with the money, which we can then sell. But I do think there is a circumstance situation where I think a lot of it was so that the public builder makes sense, because the public builder makes no sense if there's without delineating that distinction. If you want to toss some defense procurement in there at the same time, cool, I guess. But like, it really feels like now that we've seen the housing plan, and I had heard rumors that like Nate was really pushing for public building and for a more active governmental role. I had been hearing that since he took the job, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of think that this has been that is a sort of key component of it. Do you have any other takeaways from the campaign so far? Like any other sort of things that you understand? Do you have any polling takes? Do you listen to my conversation with Coletto earlier this week? Any takeaways from that?
I mean, I think from the polling takes, I just, my first take is I find that there is such a hilarious symmetry between the current takes by a lot of conservative voices on Twitter and the like, and the takes by true non supporters during like 2024. I think that there's just such lovely symmetry there between the two in terms of the denialism. I think the column you wrote today about the zombification or the Frankensteining of polls really kind of resonates on that same front, because you would see that exact kind of behavior of trying to pull together these disparate facts to create a narrative by which things that were catastrophic weren't actually as catastrophic as one might think. I think that the polling, generally speaking, has been incredibly strong and incredibly consistent is the biggest point. I mean, it would be one thing to say that we can't trust the polls or the polls might be wrong if we were seeing, number one, massive swing fluctuations week to week on or day to day for the trackers on some of these polls. Or if we were seeing kind of inconsistent movement, like if we were seeing certain polls that were trending down for the Liberals and others that were trending up. But we're not seeing that.
Something like 2021, where that polling picture was like a total clusterfuck. No one could agree with each other.
Yeah, and when you're in that sort of position, it could be like, well, someone's right, someone's wrong. And I mean, back in January, it was looking like that's what we were getting when Ecos just went off and Frankie just staked his flag and said, no, this is real, this is what's happening, and everyone and their mother was making fun of him. And then all the polls rallied up to join him, and everyone said, hey, we're a close race, he got it right. And then just as everyone was saying we're a close race, he got it right, he said, hey guys, guess what? This isn't a close race. The Liberals are just dominating it. And once again, every single person, not every single person, because you didn't do it, but every single person is like, Frankie's kind of, off. Like, what the hell is he doing? What's he been drinking? And then he's right again, as all the other polls start to rally to his position more and more. And then you end up getting people with conspiracy theories of like, oh, he's push polling to try to change public sentiment. And it's like, well, if he's push polling to change public sentiment, I guess it worked, because like literally everyone else, except for Abacus and I think Liaison, has been picking up this exact same thing. I mean, even Abacus and Liaison, when you're putting them in, you're still getting like minority liberal governments and fairly strong minority liberal governments.
So you mean innovative, not liaison?
Sorry, yeah, innovative, not liaison. Yeah, that's my bad.
Brian Burdett, who I guess is a friend of the pod. I don't know. Brian and I have an antagonistic relationship. He mapped out the latest innovative today.
Yeah,
171 liberal seats.
And that's the poll that people in this field are saying, oh, we're so back. Like,
Have some standards. Have some standards and have some shame.
have some standards from the fact that 6 months ago you were at 250.
Yeah, seriously. Seriously.
Um,
Like, I don't even remember how many. Do you have any takes on Quebec?
I prefer not to speak. Uh,
Why? Why? If you speak,
yeah,
will you be in trouble?
I mean, I fear so, just because, I'm speaking to someone, who's, at least in my mind, one of the better Quebec whisperers, at least for English language media. So I don't want to necessarily misstep and, have myself set up in effigy, but I I honestly think that, the Quebec move has, so my one major take here is we've seen a lot of talk from people in my kind of sphere, Anglos and non-Quebecers, who have had lots of very strong and strident opinion about what Quebecers will think of Carney and his French and how things are going to go. Um, and my universal take to that is, just to blow a raspberry and say, look, the people who will tell us whether or not Carney's French is good enough are Quebecers, and in particular Franco-Quebecers. They'll be the ones that'll tell us, yeah, we think his French sucks and it's unacceptable, we'll never vote for him, or we think his French sucks and we want it to improve as he's prime minister. And so far, that latter camp seems to be a heck of a lot bigger, at least in the seats that matter.
What was the TVA Janelle Leger number? What, 36-49? Carney's French is good bad. 43-23-23 vote intention.
Yeah.
Like, they know, man. No one, like, this is the point. David Clodo leaked. I say leaked if he didn't openly tell me this on the pod. Roughly about 20% of his unweighted sample had said Carney's French was not acceptable. Right?
Mm-hmm.
No one thinks his French is good.
Yeah.
Like, respectfully, nobody thinks his French is good. Obviously, this has been my, like, hobby horse for, like, far too long at this point. How is the English language coverage of Quebec so fucking bad? Why do we treat Quebec like it's fucking Narnia? Like, oh, it's so hard to understand it. Why the fuck do we do it? It's Quebec. It's not that fucking hard. Fucking Google Translate if you don't get it. But, like, what are we doing here?
I mean, it's a sort of thing where some of it's incentives. Like, if you're someone who is, a strong communicator in Quebec, there's lots and lots of incentives to write for the Quebec audience, and a significant proportion of that's going to be Francophone. There's a lot less incentive for explaining Quebec for especially the non-Quebec English language audience, especially because, there's a portion of the country that has very antagonistic views of Quebec. And, like, nothing you do or write or say can make them be reasonable about it. And so, that whole, area is a kind of a dead zone for trying to explain Quebec issues in English. It is an underserved area, but I think it's just because there's, the incentive for English language writers is the rest of Canada, and the incentive for Quebec writers is the Franco News. And, thankfully we have some very, very good, strong voices like yourself and Chantal Hébert, and to kind of help explain Quebec to Anglos, because I think it's really valuable. Because I think, Quebec is a distinct kind of cultural milieu within Canada. It's a important part of Canada, and it's an important part of Canada both culturally in the present, but also historically. And I think that, we're all better off if we understand it better, if we know it better, and we have a better grasp of the politics and the civil society that undergird it. And I think maybe if people paid more attention to that, they'd spend less time, bitching and moaning about equalization, notwithstanding them not understanding equalization.
The thing that gets me, right, is that, like, it's not hard to do, right? Pay a mild amount of attention to the French press and, like, have been to Montreal more than twice in your life. Because the thing about, like, I don't claim to, like, fully understand Quebec, right? I'm not, like, I sort of claim, like, a sort of Quebecer in absentia sort of title as the son of two Quebecers, right? But I don't claim any Quebecois heritage. I don't claim any Francophone Quebec heritage. Like, I don't claim more than what I am. But, like, man, if you don't know what we need, like, the number of people who care about Canadian politics, who don't, like, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, worked in the Sun Life building, which sort of Dorchester Square. I mean, Plastic Canada, which is not a real thing. It's just all Dorchester Square. I don't care that they've named, like, a section of it a different thing. But, like, Dorchester Square, right? Like, if you don't understand the sort of, like, cultural heritage of that city, right? If you don't understand what Dorchester Square means, like, I get it. Big country, right? I don't understand things about Edmonton or Calgary. Respectfully, Alberta's got, like, less than half of the population in Quebec, right? The thing that gets me is, like, I understand why it's not in the interest of Quebec writers. I understand why if I were Francophone, worked for the JDM or La Presse or Le Devoir, English media would not necessarily be a priority, right? Although there are a few who do, and I'm eminently grateful whatever David Cochrane has Quebec writers on. But, like, it just feels like an underserved constituency of Anglos who understand it, right? Who have done the work to understand it. Because it's literally the coverage in English Canada is horrific. It's fucking horrendous, man. And it's so funny to me because it's not that hard, because I'm not that good at it, right? I'm okay at it. It's pattern recognition. It's like knowing the city of Montreal a little bit. And it's like literally just understanding the city, like, again, one of Canada's greatest cities. But, my cultural touchstones in Montreal tend to be fairly Anglo, right? It's Dorchester Square. It's the Sun Life building. I think it's Cheap Thrills is the name of their record store up on Metcalf, right? Like, it's Pandeli's, which is a pizza place on, it's like Côte Saint Luc or Côte de Neige. I think it's Côte Saint Luc, but, like, which is one of my great stories. In 2015, I was in Quebec during the election, and as we were walking down, I think it's Côte Saint Luc. Yeah, I think it's Côte Saint Luc. On one side of the district, you're in Mount Royal with Housefather, and in the other, you're in Notre Dame de Grace, Westmount, which was Gardneau at the time. And it's like, that's all it takes to be good at this, right? It's just like, that's all the, like, cultural touchstone stuff that you need. Because that's really all I got. I've been to Quebec City once, right? I stayed in a hotel in Trois-Rivières one time in my life. That's all I got. And I'm good enough at this. I stayed in Chambly one night too. But, like, it's so bad. And I don't understand why, if you're the CBC, if you're the Star, if you're the Globe, you are not trying to cultivate these people to do a better job of it. It drives me crazy. I will say I will get to take a vaccinator lap if the block actually does collapse, like they seem like they are. I mean, I guess I should just shut up and be grateful that everyone else in English Canada sucks at doing block analysis, so I get to look like a fucking genius when they shit the bed, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Do you want to do the rant about why Preston Manning needs to go fuck himself, or should I do it?
Maybe I can feed into it at least initially, and then you can pick it up from there. Just because I just noticed some news dropped actually just as we were starting the pod. I didn't notice until now, but at least without naming names, at least one automaker has already informed their Windsor assembly plant and feeder plants that they'll be shutting down for 2 weeks starting on the 7th because of Trump tariffs. And this is tweeted out by Scott Reed, quote tweeting Daniel Smith's "Today is an important win for Canada and Alberta" tweet. And I think that really drives home, number one, the thing I said at the top, which is this disconnect that at least certain people in Alberta have towards the interests of the rest of Canada that aren't centered on oil and gas. And number two, the fact that Carney and his skills are still very much needed for stick handling this ongoing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, Preston Manning dropping an op-ed in the Globe and Mail saying that English or Eastern Canadians need to be aware of the fact that a vote for the Liberals is a vote for a national unity crisis. Go fuck yourself. From the bottom of my heart, Preston, take your fist, punch yourself in the face repeatedly, then take it, shove it up your own fucking ass, and then do it again. Okay? Go fuck yourself. You will not fucking extort me or anybody fucking else into doing what you want. Because the thing is, motherfucker, if that's the game you want to fucking play, fucking leave. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. And I will not let Albertans get so offended that Central Canada doesn't want you when that's what you're fucking saying about us, right? When it's parasite fucking provinces is the way that you talk about Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. Your sense of nationalism goes out the window the second that, God fucking forbid, you might have to be called upon to meet the moment, right? I quote tweeted somebody today being like, whatever the outcome of this, Central Canada is fully, the Liberals are fully prepared to sell out, Saskatchewan potash and Alberta oil. It's like, you are like Western Canada is fully prepared to sell out automakers, steel workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean,
you fucking know better, man. You fought in the constitutional wars of the 80s and 90s. You understand the importance of national unity. For you to threaten separation because you're not getting what you want is so unbelievably, it's seditionist, first off, and frankly, you should be arrested, and like that column should get you arrested. Fuck you. But two, you fucking know better. You absolutely fucking know better. I don't hold a lot of people from the reform wing of the Conservative Party in relatively good esteem. You fucking know better. You know how I know you know better? Because Jason Kenney fucking knows better. And I fucking hate Jason Kenney. I think Jason Kenney's a fucking piece of shit. And he fucking knows better than to indulge this shit. You fucking know better than to indulge this shit. Fuck you, Preston Manning. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah, so I think on Twitter I call Preston Manning a seditious weasel. It's
too kind.
Too kind. So I make no bones about being a Westerner. I am probably the quintessential encapsulation of what someone might think of in terms of Laurentian elite, in terms of Ontario born, Bay Street lawyer, politically Liberal Party supporter. It all fits. But I mean, my mom's a Franco-Manitoban. My dad is a Saskatchewan farm boy. My dad grew up on a farm outside of a small town in Saskatchewan. He grew up on a farm that did not have running water. In fact, he was the guy, being the second eldest, it was his job every morning to get water for the house and for the barn. And when they said we can afford running water for one or the other, and you get the water, so you get to choose. He chose the barn just because the animals consumed a lot more water than the humans did. So, my entire extended family, my mother's sister, my father's, brothers and sisters, all live, Saskatchewan West, because I have one family member in Regina, and the rest are in Alberta and BC. So I have a great deal of love for Western Canada and Western Canadians. I have absolutely no patience for this attitude. I have no patience for this concept. I have no patience for people who want to take Confederation hostage and to say, if you're going to vote against us, you're going, to trigger a national unity crisis. And I have no time for this for two things. Number one, because I think it's ultimately self-defeating for those provinces, politically and globally. Like, as I think I said on Twitter at one point to a Western Standard reporter who called not just Quebec and the Maritimes, but also Ontario, which is the biggest contributor of tax dollars to Confederation, parasite provinces. And it's, Alberta conservatives will say, why doesn't the rest of Canada take into consideration our needs? Also, Alberta conservatives, you're a bunch of disgusting parasites. How dare you? It's like, well, maybe if you didn't call people disgusting parasites, maybe, just maybe, they'd be more inclined to take your needs into consideration. That maybe that would happen. If you showed some respect, you get some respect. But beyond that, I think it's also self-defeating to those provinces from the perspective of it's fundamentally a misunderstanding of history. I think maybe this actually, tying things back, this ties back to the lack of Quebec education and understanding the history, in that a lot of them, if you kind of read some of the comments, you read some of the thought, both from actual writers and from just people online, is, well, Quebec throws national unity tantrum, gets whatever it wants, so we should do the same thing. We should get what we want. And it's like, no, you're not understanding why Quebec has leverage, why Quebec has the ability to get concessions if it needs it. It's not because they threaten national unity. When Quebec threatened national unity, do you know what happened? All of the financial institutions that used to be based in Montreal said, no, we're out. We're just going to go to Toronto because we can't risk the uncertainty of separation. Like, there's a reason why Bank of Montreal is one of the largest banks in the country, is because they were in Montreal, and Montreal was the beating financial heart of Canada until separation became a thing. So
why, so I can give some family history here. On my mother's side, my grandfather worked for Sun Life. He worked in the Sun Life building in Montreal for 30-something years or 20-something years before Quebec won in 76. And that election night, my grandmothers went to him and said, get us the fuck out of here. It took a couple of years because my mother needed to finish high school, but they moved to Florida, and then when they came back from Florida, my grandparents went to Toronto. They didn't go back to Montreal, right? My mother went back to Montreal for a bit before moving to Ottawa. Like, if Quebec separation never happened, I would have been born in fucking NDG. I would have been, Anna Gainey would be in my MP right now.
Yeah, and that's why, like, that's the damage of separation threats. That's not why they have leverage. The reason why Quebec has leverage is they have a lot of population, so they have a lot of seats. And most importantly, those seats are all competitive in a way that has impacts on who will win the election. In that there are seats that are very close between the Liberals and the Bloc, and there are seats that are very close between the Bloc and the Conservatives, and there are some three-way fights. And so how those seats move and how parties can appeal to those seats has an actual impact on who's going to win and be able to form government, both in terms of denying the Liberal seats by boosting the Bloc and by potentially winning some Conservative seats in largely Francophone Quebecois areas. And that's what gives them the leverage, because if you're not trying to appeal to those voters and their needs, you're not going to get those votes. The problem with Alberta, I know, frenemy of the pod, Brian, posted about how if the Liberal Party wins a majority, Canada is effectively Japan. That's theoretically democratic, but only one party wins. That's not Canada. That's Alberta. That's like Saskatchewan. Like that's a situation in a lot of the prairies that federally and provincially, it's like, well, I hate how the government's being run. I'm just going to keep voting for the same party I voted all the time, and I'm sure things will change. It's like if you want the Liberals to cater to you, you have to elect more than like 5 of like 30 something seats. It's got to be viable. It's got to be, maybe it has a conservative tilt and a conservative edge, but there has to be the thought that, another party is going to have, some substantial inroads. Quite frankly, it probably doesn't even have to be the Liberals. It could be the NDP and then form minority governments and act as kingmaker if the NDP actually realizes their function.
Yeah, that'll never happen.
That'll never happen. But so it could be the Liberals, and then maybe that will be something that will be good. And if you're not going to do that, if you're going to essentially say, no matter what happens, we're always going to be voting for the Conservative Party, then if you have limited political and financial capital as a government, unless there is a gross overriding need or a huge amount of being willing to put the country over the needs of the party and your other needs, those needs are going to go to the bottom of the pile. And, I think it actually says a lot of this, given this situation, that back in, the Trudeau years, one of the most politically courageous things Justin Trudeau did was, after TMX got killed, he stepped up and he built it. He expended financial and political capital for no gain, just to help out the economy of Alberta.
For a place that fucking hates him.
And this is an excellent example. After he did that, if there had been a significant chunk of Albertans that said, hey, look, this shows he has our back. He might not be perfect, but he's willing to burn bridges with key parts of his constituency. And, I'm a guy, because I'm politically engaged. I talk to people. I try to convince people to vote Liberal. And I've talked with people who are environmentally conscious and about, back then the carbon tax was still a thing, and trying to sell them on it. And the response is, well, yeah, but he bought a pipeline, and that more than makes up for the carbon tax and the negative side of things. So I could never vote for him. Like, there was a real impact to that. And if a bunch of Albertans had said, no, you know what, he actually does have our back on this, and he's not perfect, but maybe I'll give him a shot. And maybe the Liberals win like 10 to 12 seats. Then that's a movement that you can build from. And then you can say, well, we got to start doing more here, because this is something that's actually has some return on what we're doing politically from a political capital standpoint. But we got the exact opposite. And so the lesson becomes, if you touch the stove and it burns you, you stop touching the stove.
Yeah, the response becomes a bunch of people who have my views on this, which hilariously, a lot of the people who got really, really offended with me for saying if Alberta wants to leave, tell them the door at your ass on the way out. A lot of the didn't see a lot of those people condemning Preston Manning today.
Yeah,
must have missed those tweets.
Yeah.
Did you see that the NDP, one of their content creators that they're using to try and save their campaign, is an OnlyFans model?
I had not seen that.
Yeah, Brian Lilly tweeted about it a couple hours ago. It just popped up on Twitter. It feels not great that the NDP feel the need to. No, I mean, well, one, that they don't have the capacity to vet that, because that's I don't really give a shit that it's an OnlyFans model. They did a video with Singh, by the way. Singh is in this video talking about Palestine and, fuck the Israelis. I watched it without sound. It seemed the general tenor was fuck the Israelis, which is a perfectly acceptable tenor to have. Feels a little tiny bit weird that is the, general oeuvre of the NDP's content these days, is to A, focus on a foreign policy fight that doesn't seem to have much resonance anymore, and B, that they're relying on influencers to save their bacon. Do you have any other takes before we get out of here? Jesus, we've been talking for longer than I thought we had been.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've reached a natural denouement. I guess my kind of last take here is that I think, nothing is certain in the election as it's going. I mean, we've seen a few dips and whizzes. But at the end of the day, I think, if you're gonna tell me you have to have one group's hand at this moment in time, I think I'd rather be the Liberal Party than anyone else. Maybe this is one slightly off topic. I don't want to drag us down for too long, but I've noticed that we once again today, after a reprieve of a day or two, have been getting the Conservatives eating their own young, kind of infighting back and forth. And I just think that, regardless of what happens, I'm not sure there can be anyone that's going to be able or willing to step in and be the winged hussars arriving to save the day.
My favorite sort of conversation in this is people being like, "Oh, are they going to bring Corey Taneke? Taneke, I think is the answer. Into this campaign. Why the fuck would Corey take it?
Yeah.
Why is he letting this loss go on his record? Right? Why is he touching this with a 15-foot fucking pole when he can just sit on like fucking Failures Anonymous or whatever that fucking podcast is called? I'm just doing this as a bit now, by the way. I'm just never going to refer to that. I know what the name of the podcast is. I'm never going to refer to it properly. You know why?
Because you don't have enough beer and popcorn?
This is why I like you, Glasgow. This is why I like you. Because fuck David Hurley and fuck Scott Reed too. Robert Glasgow, partner of McCarthy's, Sens fan extraordinaire. On Twitter at the trade law guy.
Yeah, at the trade law guy.
Nice. Follow me on Twitter at Scrimshaw. Read my political writing at scriptunscripted.substack.com. Like and subscribe to this video on YouTube. I'm probably gonna write about hockey. I'm feeling like a deep. I'm. Okay, we're just doing this at the end of the podcast. I don't give a shit. I generally, when I'm covering an election, I like hit the wall of the election, right?
Yeah.
In 2021, I hit the wall the Thursday before polling day. I remember exactly what it was. I have already hit the wall. There are 26 days left. And I think the only way I'm going to get through this campaign is by writing about hockey. Legitimately, I think I have to start a hockey column. Usually I used to do that for the Lions, and then they were fucking dumbasses and fired all of the good, well, not all, most of the good staff there. So I think I'm going to do some hockey writing at Unscripted. If you don't care about my hockey writing, I really don't give a shit. I need it for my sanity. Also, my work is free. Deal with it. If it's Sens Leafs, and if it's a Game 7, depending on exactly when the playoffs start, there is the slightly uncomfortable possibility that there is a Game 5 or a Game 6 or even potentially Game 7, depending on when the playoffs start. Sort of on the weekend of the Canadian election. If the Sens play a high leverage playoff, if Sens Leafs play a high leverage playoff game on election night, would it be completely unhinged of me to go to the game?
I
So I am
mean,
thinking about this.
if it's a high leverage, like if it's a game 7 and it Sens Leafs, I mean, I grew up as a Sens fan during like those late 90s, early 2000s battles of Ontario that we unfortunately usually lost.
Always.
Yeah. I was trying to bomb myself with a usually, but thank you. Um, uh, I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable because well, let's see. Would it be a not would it be a 9 p.m. start or like a 7 p.m. start?
So it would be either a 7 or a 7:30.
Because if it's a 7 start, then you're done for sure by like sometime between 9 and 10, unless there's overtime.
Yeah.
I mean, like, but here's the thing: if you're game 7 overtime, Leafs Sens, that's worth watching.
I think what I'm going to do, I'm thinking my tentative plan for election night is I'm going to live blog. I am slightly worried that the only way I'm going to get through 2.5 hours of live blogging Newfoundland and Atlantic Canada results is straight up just a live blogging of hockey when there's nothing happening. I hate the way that we release results in Canada. I fucking hate it. Just let us be like America and release as time zones go. I fucking hate it. You with me on this?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. This election is also a little bit like depending on the polling and how accurate the polling is. I mean, this is an election that may end up being climactic after they hit Ontario.
Oh, there's a chance by the time BC closes the polls at 9 o'clock, we know who's already won. And we know whether it's majority or minority. Because the other thing is, of course, Gaspésie closes. Gaspésie closes weird because I think it closes at 8:30 Eastern because I think it closes at 9:30 local. And like Gaspésie isn't a perfect comparison, but like if the Liberals are winning that by say 10%, I'm just making up a number, right? The seat was redistributed to be a block seat in the redistribution. So if we're winning that by like 5-10 points, oh man, if you can basically just start you can just start knocking off block incumbents in Monteville or Blainville or Shefford or Taban or whatever. Last question, and I will let you go. Should I work on a French accent for the campaign, or should I just continue to say Monteville like the most unpolished angle of all time?
I mean, Monteville would probably want you to be able to pronounce it a little bit better. I mean, at least better than this Anglo.
Yeah, but there is a bit of charm in the fact that like I cannot pronounce any of the names right, but also I am smarter than 99% of like NatPo, Globe and Mail, and Star columnists about Quebec.
I mean, like I'm a dedicated listener of the first the History of Rome and then the Revolutions podcast with Mike Duncan. And so I have my share of the charm of podcasters that just absolutely butcher foreign names. So I think it's acceptable. I think you're probably safe.
Thanks for doing this, buddy.
Thanks for having me. You have a great one.